Hello and welcome to this very special ABC broadcast. I'm Elizabeth Jackson and today we're broadcasting from Tennyson Woods College in Mount Gambier in South Australia. We have a live studio audience with us. We have a selection of students from years 9, 10, 11 and 12 and a very special welcome to our online audience today. We have students from all over Australia joining us throughout our webcast and hopefully sending through lots of questions for our panel to discuss. So we're looking forward to hearing the questions that you have on our topic, which is, of course, reporting from a war zone or a conflict zone. So I'd like to start this broadcast today by introducing you to our panel of guests. And right beside me is Geoff Thompson, who is a reporter with the ABC's Four Corners program, but prior to that, Geoff spent many years as a foreign correspondent for the ABC. And sitting next to Geoff is Kate Geraghty, who is a photojournalist with the Sydney Morning Herald, an award-winning photojournalist, and we're very honoured to have both Kate and Geoff joining us today and talking to us from their experience of reporting in a war zone or in several war zones. Geoff, I wonder if I might kick off with you and, you know, let's start at the very beginning. What was it, do you think, that made you decide from a fairly early age, as I understand, that you wanted to be not just a journalist but a foreign correspondent?
Yeah, I remember, you know, when I was very young, about 6 or 7, heading off to bed at night and going past the TV where the news was on and seeing little snippets about the closing stages of the Vietnam War, and just it striking me as a young child that, oh, that looks dangerous and uncomfortable, and it sort of stayed with me. And that interest developed, and a sort of interest in this sort of the exotic adventure that conflict zones seem to be. And then when I was a teenager, it was the sort of early days of 60 Minutes and people like George Negus and Ian Leslie were sort of stomping around in South America and places. And I thought, wow, you can actually do that for a job. And it became a bit of an obsession, so that when I was in year 12, in the yearbook from the school I went to, it still has a picture of me in there saying ambition foreign correspondent. And you go through various turns, and I went off and did a law degree and other things, but it ended up coming true, which was very satisfying, and I feel very privileged to have had that opportunity.
Kate, what about you? Was it all about the adventure from an early age?
Well, my interest in photography and reporting came very, very gradually. My first kind of, look at news or was our household had to be completely silent at 6 o'clock so Dad could watch the news on TV. And then my passion in photography started probably at high school, but it wasn't really till I got my first job at the Border Mail in Albury-Wodonga that I realised it wasn't a job, that it's a lifestyle. Working for a newspaper, you live and breathe news. You could be called up at 2 o'clock in the morning to go and cover a car accident, or you could be on a job and get a phone call, okay, you have to go off to Bali because there's been explosions. So yeah, it was very gradual, and yeah, it's a fantastic career.
So it was a passion that certainly developed as you became more skilled at it.
Oh, absolutely. I think everyone, I went through a cadetship, so I had great mentors along the way, Alex Massey, Mike Bowers, incredible photographers who nurtured and gave me opportunities. So I was very, very lucky. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's start with some questions from our online audience. We have a question from Jasmine for you, Kate. She wants to know, what does it take to be a good photojournalist?
Well, I think you have to have passion for wanting to tell people's stories. You have to give respect to everyone who you come across and photograph, and a drive to just want to continually the next day go out and do it again and again and again. Yeah.
Let's take a question now from our studio audience. We're going to sort of go from one to the other. And we have a young lady in the middle there, ready to ask a question.
Geoff, do you ever feel limited in terms of what you're able to tell your audience?
I think you feel limited in the sense that you're on tight deadlines. You have only a small amount of time to gather information. You can't. There's always a demand to know and to know now. So I think there's a limitation in that sense. I don't think there's a limitation in the sense that you might, for instance, not show them really graphic pictures. You may not describe all the sort of gory detail of something you may have seen. So there's I guess you're self-censoring in that regard because you're in a primetime audience at home. There's certainly no limitation that's put on you within the ABC. But I know that from working in countries like Indonesia, it's very hard to convince often people in that country that that's the case. They think because it's a government-owned station that you will be limited. And certainly I was never limited when I'd been an embedded journalist in places like Iraq, by the military. You would think they would do that, but my experience was that they didn't.
Geoff, an online question from Michael. He wants to know, what are some highlights of the job from your perspective?
Look, I think the highlights are, well, really getting paid to sort of travel the world to some of the most unseen places, experiencing history in the front row as it's unfolding, and experiencing human drama, and your job being to shine light in the dark places that you find, so that where you find people who have often in those places very little voice in their own country, and then you have the opportunity to give them a voice in the world. I think if there is a highlight, I think that is it.
Kate, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. Getting to travel the world and meet people from all walks of life, learn the history of a country and the traditions and culture. I never dreamed that I'd get to, be in places like Baghdad or Kabul, or go to the Congo. It's an extraordinary responsibility as well to tell the stories of these people. But yeah, it's a great job.
One of our correspondents at the ABC once said to me that he felt like a disaster tourist. He just kind of went from disaster to disaster, which no doubt carries its own cost. But let's take another question from our studio audience. We have quite a few coming in online, but we want to mix them around. So there's a gentleman right in the middle there, if we could get a mic to him.
What drives you to report or photograph from different war zones?
Yes, interesting question. Why, Geoff? Why?
Look, I think it was a desire to get out in the world. It was to be able to. I have a theory that basically all life as human beings is about stories. It's about competing narratives, and being able to. And when your responsibility is to go into the world and tell narratives which are true and to represent truth, that they are always going to be competing against mistruths. So, if you're not writing the truth as it is, then someone's going to write write mistruths, I think. So that's probably what drives me, and the desire to uncover things that vested interests don't want to be uncovered. If someone's trying to hide it, then I naturally want to reveal it. And I think if you can bring that to and that sort of I guess that priority which an organisation like the ABC has, if you can bring that to countries where they don't have those opportunities, then I think you're doing a good service.
Mm-hmm. Kate, a question from Bonnie. She wants to know whether you've ever had any of your equipment confiscated.
Yes, I have. So 3 years ago, we had all of our equipment confiscated. It was myself and Paul McGough, who's the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age's chief correspondent. We were sent by our newspapers to cover a flotilla headed to Gaza. and these boats were full of activists carrying humanitarian aid. This flotilla in international waters was intercepted by the Israeli military. 9 people were killed, 57 were shot and injured. One man is still in a coma from that incident. But as a result, we were apprehended, and then all our gear was confiscated, and we were then put in prison for a couple of days and then deported. So yes, I have had my gear stolen.
So that was an extraordinary situation, Kate, to find yourself in and to survive.
Well, look, I mean, it was a very short amount of, like, the violence went on for a very short amount of time. If you put it in, compare it to people living in Baghdad or Afghanistan, you know, they live, you know, in extreme violence, some people for their entire lives. We went through half an hour. I mean, that's what my memory of it was, a short amount of intense violence. Obviously for the families who lost people, it's a different perspective, but yeah. I mean, it was frightening, don't get me wrong.
Okay, so from Jade and Alice online, how are you protected, Geoff, in a war zone when you're working?
Well, you're not really protected. I think you're protected by your relationships and by the knowledge that you have and the people that you're working with have. So if you're, say, I'm thinking just of one example being in a street in Pakistan when there was a violent riot and you end up getting caught between the two sides, that's not a good place to be. Right? You want to be behind one side, preferably the side that's going to be making an advance and not getting beaten up. Of course, you have things like flak jackets and helmets and things you wear in war zones, but frankly, look, if your numbers up, if there's a high-powered round or a shell going off, it's not going to really do you much good. So it's really your knowledge and your preparation, and also who you're with, and also your instincts and the judgment calls you make.
Well, it'd be good for us to actually see some of your work. So we're going to move along now and talk about Iraq, because you've both had vast experience there. Geoff, I might begin again with you. Tell me, how did you first come to find yourself in Iraq?
It came out of my experience going into Afghanistan. I was very set after that about knowing that there was going to be an invasion of Iraq, even though the international decision hadn't been made yet. The momentum was certainly heading that way. So we arranged to become embedded with US Marines in moving out of Kuwait. And that led to us being with the US Marines for about 20 days as they made their way towards Baghdad, jumping between different units. And while we were there, we for the first time actually in Australian television history, we were able to produce and edit and send via satellite phone from the battle zone, if you like, remotely back to Australia, and that went to air on Australian TV, nightly news pieces, and we compiled some of those stories into a longer piece for Foreign Correspondent that came to be known as the Road to Baghdad.
On a morning of war, a nasty awakening for the Republican Guard.
Stand by! Good morning, Republican Guard from the United States Marines. Hoorah!
Artillery Battery Commander Captain Phil Bragg directing the blows before the Marines launch an infantry attack.
And we normally fire at the beginning to destroy and suppress the enemy that they're going up against. Normally what happens as soon as they make a breakthrough, they move pretty rapidly, and we have to spend the rest of the time trying to catch up with them.
And so the quick roll to Baghdad begins. Artillery and infantry units leapfrogging each other in brisk succession. Through towns at a quick clip, some civilians seeking to surrender, others treated as prisoners of war. Military uniforms nowhere to be seen.
We're pretty much overwhelming all their defenses and moving pretty rapidly. Probably about as fast as you can go. I don't think you could go any faster.
Civilians at least appear to be welcoming the invaders' advance.
Hello, what's your name?
My name is Lee. What's your name?
Ahmed.
Ahmed? Good to meet you, Ahmed.
As I speak to you now, US forces are probing the capital, while we remain here on the outskirts of the city. the long-ranging weapons of these artillery units making any further advance for them unnecessary. We simply don't know where this war will take us next. A sense of uncertainty I suspect we share with those of you watching these events from home.
So, Geoff, you put together that report whilst you were embedded with the troops there. Can you describe for us what that experience is like, to be embedded with troops whilst you're trying to go about doing journalistic work?
Yeah, look, you're basically eating, living and digging your own foxhole every night and sleeping on the ground alongside the troops who are fighting. It was an exciting time. You know, I don't want to lie that it was it's every sort of boy's dream to be rolling across a desert in such a dramatic circumstances. And it was at the time a perspective of which Australians hadn't seen since the Vietnam War, to see US forces on the ground fighting. So I think it was a legitimate perspective on the war. But I think it's never the only perspective, and it should never be taken as the only way of reporting a war. And it was one aspect to it, and it was a fascinating thing to do. But you're never going to get the whole picture of what's going on.
Kate, we're going to take a look at some of the photographs that you've taken and begin with this particular photo that you took in Iraq back in 2003 on the outskirts of Basra. Can you describe for us what was going on when you took that photo?
So what we're looking at here is British soldiers during the Battle of Basra. So Basra is the second largest city in Iraq, and it's in southern Iraq. And so we've got British soldiers, and so they'd been firing for a couple of days, or the battle had been going for a day or so. And so this soldier on the right, he's been firing for about 6 hours. So he's actually walking back to his tank to have a bit of a break, and the guy who's lying down on the left has taken his position. But looking at this picture, you know, for me, I can still remember this day. I can remember taking this picture. You know, the smoke, it's choking the air from the oil fields that were burning, and the smoke's just filling the sky. I remember getting back at the end of the day and thinking I had a really good suntan, but then you could actually wipe it off, and it was from all the particles of oil, you know, falling on your skin. And the sounds, no one prepares you for the sounds or the smell of covering a conflict. So, you know, the sound of tanks grinding down, you know, the roads like in convoys, and then the shelling and firing is really quite loud, and it kind of vibrates through your body as well. And and then the British soldiers also had speakerphones where they were announcing in Arabic to the civilians of Basra to flee, because you know, the fighting would become more intense. So yeah.
So another online question from Taya. Are you often faced with the dilemma, do I get involved and make a difference, or do I get a good story or a good picture? Hopefully it's not an either-or proposition, but it's an interesting question. Have you ever found yourself in that situation, Geoff?
Look, I mean, we're there as observers and documenters, but there's certainly situations. Yes, I remember one night in East Timor when we got a phone call late at night in the hotel, and all the journalists kind of got together because the head of the local Human Rights Commission, his house was being attacked, and we all went round there and kind of refused to leave until the situation calmed down. So yes, it does sort of happen because you know that you can make a difference in the sense that there will be an act of violence against a human being which is unjustified and unnecessary. But I never reported on that. You know, that was just simply by our presence there as foreigners, we could have made a difference. But you know, unfortunately, very often you're there to your service, if there is one, is to show the world what's going on and to try and bring people into that situation emotionally so that they can react to it. So most of the time, that's how we do it, I think.
Okay, well, let's take another question now from our studio audience. So who do we have that would like to? Yes, so right in the middle. Thank you.
How do you feel about going into a war zone and how do you prepare yourself?
Kate, do you want to start off there?
Sure.
How do you feel about going into a war zone? Obviously very comfortable.
Well, no, very nervous, you know, I mean, but most of the time you don't have much time to really think about it. I mean, the Iraq War, before I went there, we were doing a hostile environment, chemical warfare training. So we were learning how to put on our NBC suits and gas masks and how to inject our legs with atropine in case of, you know, a chemical attack. And so while we were going through that, the borders around Iraq were actually shutting down. So I left within days, you know, within a day or so of doing that training. So preparing is vitally important as much as you can. So you do that kind of in your day-to-day, life when you're waiting to go on assignment. So you read as much as you can, you watch every kind of news that you can, you read books about the politics and cultures of different places. So you try and keep yourself, you know, up to date on both domestic and international current events.
And Geoff, you've been as prepared probably as you can be by the ABC, would have been through the hostile environments course and that sort of thing. Do you think that makes a difference?
Oh yeah, I often wonder, will I remember when the time comes,
Yeah.
you know, how to stop someone bleeding to death or whatever. But it does make a difference, but I would say that it's at different times in my life I've had different feelings and different ways of preparing. I know that when I first landed in East Timor, 3 days after being, just being a reporter in Australia and then with almost no notice being in a conflict zone, I was full of apprehension, and I don't think the apprehension probably left me for the 6 months I was there. And then later on, going into Iraq, I was at a point in my life where I thought, well, what happened to her? Whatever happens, happens, I don't care, And then now I've got a young family, and if I'm going into a conflict situation, I'm thinking about them more than I am about myself. And actually, whether I want to go or not, it's not really the point, But it's about, I'm probably more careful and more calculated now than I would be then, because I was probably more of a risk taker then. So it sort of depends at what point in your life, I think.
And Henry wants to know, has there been any fun experience for you? I'm sure there has, whilst you've been in these war zones.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's often, the thing is, you might go out into a situation and at the time it can be the most terrifying thing you've experienced. I remember it's a long time ago now, but being chased in East Timor by guys with guns and knives, and we had to run for a car and screeched off in a car. And
that was fun?
No, not at the time. but once it's all over and the adrenaline's rushing and you're sitting around and having a meal and enjoying yourself.
And great camaraderie.
You all feel like you're part of something, and you feel like it's a bit of an initiation rite or something as a foreign correspondent to have been in that sort of situation. But yes, there is in between. When you're doing those sorts of stories, there is a lot of energy, and there is a lot of humour, because it's giddily exciting at times, often dangerous, and often there's times where it's very dull. It's military exercise. Wars are like that. Nothing happens, and then and the only thing that anyone ever remembers is this short burst, like it happened to you on the, on the ship. But there was a long trip before you got there.
Yeah,
no doubt.
absolutely. Yeah.
So Kate, fun times?
Oh look, there's been numerous. I was actually talking before with you about when we were in Baghdad, and myself and Mohammed is our driver in Iraq, and so we were going from Baghdad down to hook up with Australian Navy clearance divers for Anzac Day, and so I said to Mohammed, all right, we'll try and get food enough for your family for a week or so, one, so that they've got something to eat, and two, maybe if he doesn't come back. And so we're in this shop. It was his friend's shop, and I said, go and get whatever you need. And so he brings back this can of hot dogs, and he goes, the hottie doggies are the family favourite. And I'm thinking, oh my God, they're full of pork. But I didn't say that. And his friend is behind him going, no, Kate, you must come with me to the ice cream room. And he's going, please do not tell Mohammed that it is full of the pig. I'm going, oh my God. And yeah, he's got armfuls of hot dog cans.
Hottie doggy.
You know.
You have to laugh.
Yeah, look, you know. And their humour, you know. Fixers are usually local journalists who work with you, and so you have this team. Well, for a newspaper anyway, you have a journalist. It's usually correspondent or your chief correspondent, and then the fixer, who is a local journalist usually, and your interpreter, and obviously the photographer. And so yeah, you become a very tight-knit group, and it is fun times. Yeah.
I think one question that a lot of the students probably have in their minds is a question about the aftermath of war. You go in and you do your story and then you get to go home, but the people that you leave behind have a very different experience. Do you think about them often? What do you think about the stories that you leave behind?
I think you think about, there's definitely individuals you leave behind, and there's individuals that provided you with a story, and you have that nagging feeling that, you know, do you have a responsibility to them beyond telling their story? I know there's a young girl in East Timor who had her eye shot out by the militia when she was in Bishop Bellow's house towards the end, and we told her story several times, and I still, you know, I keep wondering what's become of her, and I still, every now and then I go, oh, I've really got to find out what's happening with Liliana, and I still haven't done it. So yes, I feel guilty, but then again, where does that end? Where does that begin and end? Because we're meeting people like that all the time, and we take their stories and we put them to the world, and most of the time we move on.
Kate, what about your experience?
I don't think you can really switch off, especially immediately after you've come back. I think you always think about, you know, especially the fixers that you work with. You know, you hear of car bombs going off in Baghdad and you think, oh God, is Mohammed or Sarah okay? You know, what about their families? Oh, it's in that suburb. Oh, maybe they were going to work that day. So, you know, and same with the guys in Afghanistan or anywhere that you go. You do think about them all the time, and because you do keep in contact with them, and same with, you know, with people who you photograph and do stories on. The aftermath, how they are continuing their life it worries you sometimes.
We have an online question from Alison. Geoff, what's touched you most when reporting from a war zone?
Look, I think it's got to be just human resilience and kindness amidst tragedy. When people have nothing, I think it's particularly true in the Middle East, that they have nothing, but they will still make you feel like an honoured guest, and they will still show you great hospitality and kindness. And I think, that always amazes me. And it's something which you wonder whether that, you know, in our own country, if we were facing the same sort of situation, whether you'd get the same sort of kindness and hospitality. You'd like to think so, but we don't know, because it hasn't happened here.
Kate?
Sorry, what was the question again?
What has touched you most?
What's touched me most? I think the hospitality of people, and also, you know, seeing people who have got every you know, excuse to be so angry and hate the world for what's happening to them, and yet they offer, you know, they have hope that things will change and things will get better. So seeing that element in people is very touching, and I think it's.
Quite inspiring.
Yes.
Well, look, unfortunately, that is all we have time for today. I'd ask our studio audience, please, to say thank you to our guests, Kate Geraghty and Geoff Thompson, for joining us here today. Thank you to the students here at Tennyson College. And I'd also like to say thanks to our online audience, because we've had some absolutely terrific questions from you today. So thank you so much for taking part. We look forward to joining you again next time. Thank you.